This drawstring bag is an elevated miniature work of art. Join me as I take every step to the next level with loads of extra details, from using a template to adding mushrooms to adding layers of colorful stitch. There's even a special detail on the inside lining. If you've made a drawstring bag with me before, this is an opportunity to take your skills even further for an extra special stitched piece. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. Both embroidery needles and Milliners needles will work well with this project. I'm also using wonder clips and sewing pins today. And these are the colors of 6-stranded embroidery floss that I'm using, and I stitch with 2 strands throughout the project. This is the fabric collage that I'm working with today. I've chosen my fabrics, I've arranged them, and I've basted them in place with sewing thread. I have a more in-depth tutorial about how you can get to this point, and I will link to that video. So I've begun stitching around each patchwork piece. I'm using a light green embroidery floss, 2 strands, and I've started to surround each piece. So that's going to be my first layer of stitching for this project. So here I've completed surrounding each patchwork piece with stitching, and I've also started doing some slow stitching in this one area. And now I've come up with the idea of adding something to this piece. And I'm thinking of a mushroom. I have a new mushroom template that I've just created. It's part of a larger set that has birds and a bat, and I want to integrate this template into this project. So I'm using the mushroom from the set that has these cutouts. And the thing I like about these cutouts is that it gives me the opportunity to move the template around and see where I want the stem of that mushroom to be. So I like this piece of floral yellow as a stem. I also like the look of this green and turquoise piece as a stem. I've pulled out this red gingham fabric that I think is going to be very fun to use as this mushroom. So I'm going to trace this mushroom onto the fabric and cut it out and then decide where I want to place it. I'm using my Frixion Erasable pen to trace this template today, and I'm going to trace it directly onto the fabric. So I'm placing it in the middle. I'm going to hold it down and just trace around, and I'm going to trace around all of the cutouts. I'm going to start on the outside and then move to the inner cutout pieces. So now I've traced my piece. It's a little hard to see, and I'm ready to cut it out. Now, depending on the fabric you're using, you may want to use a different method with these templates. Another method that's really good if you have a fabric that frays easily is the freezer paper method. I'm going to include a clip on how I use freezer paper with templates, and in this case I'm using it to cut out a deer fawn. And I'll also link to that full video if you want to see that complete project as well. So I'm in Canada, where I live. This is the freezer paper that I'm able to get. It comes on a roll. Depending on where you live, it may be brown or white. It doesn't matter. Here's a small piece. The roll is quite long, and so I don't end up using a full piece. Usually I cut them up. So this piece is going to be big enough, I think. Yeah, that piece is going to work. And so with freezer paper, there's a shiny side and a dull side. So I would trace onto this dull side and iron the shiny side onto the fabric. So I'm going to try this today with the freezer paper. So I'm not going to use the heat erasable pen, because what would happen when I ironed this onto the fabric is it would disappear. The line I traced would disappear, and that would defeat the purpose. So I'm going to use a regular pen for this. So I've just used a ballpoint pen, and I've traced this. So now I can take this and be strategic with the placement of this, making sure that I get all of it in, and then iron it on to the piece, and can kind of see through it, and so it gives you some options. If you can see the pattern through, in this case I can, so I can kind of move it up and down a bit and decide where I want it to be before I let the iron hit it. So I've placed it as best I can to make sure that I'm getting all of the deer, and I've ironed it on, and then letting it cool before I touch it. And because this is paper that's now ironed onto this fabric, I'm not going to use my fabric scissors. I'm going to use my paper scissors, and I'm going to cut it out. So I'm going to use a combination of my paper scissors, and I have a smaller set of scissors that can cut paper. So I'm going to use both of these and just carefully cut around this. So I've cut all the way around, and I took the time to also cut around the tail because you can use these again even though there's no fabric there at the tail. These freezer paper templates, you can use them a few times before they don't stick anymore. Okay, now that's peeled off. So I've cut around the outside of this mushroom. This template can also be used without the cutouts. I'm placing it on my piece to see if I like that gingham fabric, and I do. So now I'm going to cut out the rest of the mushroom. So I'm using my embroidery scissors, and I'm just moving slowly and carefully cutting out that piece. And depending on the fabric you're using, this might be easy or tricky. So there is the bottom part of my mushroom cut out, and now I can audition the different areas of placement for the stem. There's really no right or wrong. It's just a matter of moving it around and finding the one that you like the most. There's lots of options in this piece. So I'm just going to move it around and choose one that I like. And I think I like it right here. And it's a combination of the color that the stem will be and the colors that are around it. So I'm liking the placement of the mushroom there. So now I'm going to stitch it down. I'm using white embroidery floss, 2 strands. And I'm moving my way around the stem part, and I'm almost couching that in place because the fabric is so thin there. Putting my needle directly in can cause some splitting in the fabric. So I've decided to couch it down. And now I'm going to continue around the top part of the mushroom with this white and stitch it all in place. I'm taking straight stitches perpendicular to the edges. So I'm going outside of the edge and then inside the mushroom with these straight stitches. I'm going to continue and move all the way around. I haven't cut out the areas in the top part of that mushroom. They're very tiny, but they are drawn there, so I know that I will be able to stitch over them. So now I've moved my way around the entire top of the mushroom, and I had some thread left, so I started stitching that one line on the right there at the bottom. So now I'm going to thread up and continue stitching these small parts. So I folded this piece in half, and I can see that if I want to, I can even put a mushroom on the other side. I'm going to do more stitching on this mushroom first and see how I like the progress that I get. So now I've stitched the areas that I had marked with the erasable pen, added white stitching there, and so now I'm ready to erase those lines. So I'm bringing in my mini iron and I'm hovering it over top to erase all those lines. Now I've decided to bring in some red floss. I picked a red that seems to match well with the fabric, and I'm going to do some stitching around the top part of the mushroom and see where that takes me. So I've stitched around the edges, and I've been taking the stitches fairly close together. So that stitch that I've done is a satin stitch, and the satin stitch are just straight stitches that are placed very close together. It's creating a nice outline for this mushroom. I'm also going to add some red to that bottom area of the mushroom cap, and I'm going to surround those larger white circles that I stitched in red as well. So here I've added more red, the bottom of the mushroom and around. That's made those marks pop even more. So now I'm looking at the bottom part of the mushroom, and I think I want to add some white into the stem. I'm continuing to use 2 strands of floss. So I've added some white lines to that stem, and I've decided I do want to add another mushroom. I'm looking at the one that I've stitched, and it's very close to the edge. So what I'm going to do is bring in some more fabric. So I have a strip of green here That's a nice match to the rest of the piece. And I have enough that I can stitch it on both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this strip of fabric and I'm going to place it on the right side. I'm going to flip my piece over. I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to create a line right along the felt there. And that's going to be the line that I'm going to stitch on. I'm going to use a running stitch to attach this piece of green fabric. So I've just completed my stitching on this one side. I've drawn the line and I've done my running stitch. So it's now attached right along the edge. And now what I'm going to do is flip that piece over and I'm going to use my hands to fold it and make it flat. Could also iron this if necessary. And I still have some thread left on my needle. So I'm going to come onto the front and I'm going to do a running stitch right along that seam. So I'm just stitching in and out and in and out. And that's going to keep that seam flat. So here is the other side where I've already done that, and you can see that that piece is attached. It's nice and flat, and it's widened my area that I can work in. I'm also going to be able to take these and fold them to the inside at a later stage of this project. So they'll be folded in, and they're going to create part of the lining when this bag is folded and stitched. So now on the other side, I'm going to add another mushroom. So I've cut another one out using the same template, and now I'm placing it there, and I have enough room with that green that I've added that that mushroom's going to fit nicely over top of that yellow floral piece where I want the stem to be. So now I just need to stitch that piece on as well, and I think just for fun I'm going to stitch this one on in a different way than I stitched the first mushroom. So here's my second mushroom stitched in place. I've done this one slightly different than the other. So that gave me opportunities to experiment and try something different. So now I'm going to continue to stitch this bag, and I'm going to add slow stitching lines. I'm going to vary the direction. I'm going to choose different colors. It's a really good opportunity to just relax and let things unfold. I'm adding the running stitch in a matching red right in the middle. And this is where the bag will fold, and the red stitching will end up on both sides, stretching from one mushroom to the other. I feel like this red stitching is integrating the red of the mushrooms into the rest of the collage, and it's adding a sense of unity that I like. I'm going to add to the density of the stitching in between the lines I've created, and I'll probably take the stitching up a bit further as well. I've added those lines of extra stitching, and I'm loving how striking it is. I've also added running stitches in blue and light green over the rest of the patchwork, and it's added so much wonderful texture. I'll flip it over and take a look at the other side where I've done the same thing. The stitching has added so much. Here's a look at the whole rectangle. I love how as a single piece it all ties together. The colors and the textures are just fantastic. If you feel so inclined, please like this video and subscribe. It helps the algorithm put this video in front of others who might enjoy it. So now it's on to the lining. I'm going to fold the green fabric to the back, and those pieces are longer on both ends. So I'm going to fold the edges under and stitch them in place. And that will give me nice clean edges for the next step in the construction. So I've done a simple running stitch to secure those folds, and now I can take this piece and fold it in half to see how it looks. You can see a thin strip of green at the edges and the top, and there's no raw edges because everything's folded under, except for right along the top, which is where I'm going to add the channels for the drawstring. I have two pieces of fabric. This is fabric that is part of the patchwork in a few places. So I know it's going to match well with the rest of the bag. The two fabric strips are 2 inches wide and 5 inches long. So the 5-inch matches the width of my bag. I'm going to fold the strips in half, so that's along the 2-inch side. And I'm also going to fold over the edges about 1/4 inch on each side. So that's going to hide the raw edges and make my strips shorter by about 1/2 inch. I've ironed those 1/4 inch edges down, And I've decided to add a lining to the channels. So I grabbed some of that light green fabric and I created 2 more strips the same size. And I'm going to place these strips wrong sides together, and I'm going to add running stitches to join them. And this is going to make the channels stronger, and it's going to make the channels visually match the bag. I've pinned these pieces together to keep them from shifting, and I'm starting at one end with 2 strands of the same blue floss that I've used in the body, and I'm going to create running stitches up and down the strip. And you can see that I haven't folded under the edges on the long side, and that's because those edges are going to be stitched under when I attach the channels. When I get to the end, I want to make sure that the edges are still folded under nicely, and I keep checking to make sure that the folds are caught in my stitches. And I'm working through some extra thicknesses here, so I take my time. Because I've only folded in 1/4 of an inch, I need to stitch an extra line right up at the edge to make sure that all the fabric is caught in the stitching. And then I bring my thread to the green side, which is going to be the inside, and I knot off and I bury my thread. So here are my stitch channels. They're nice and thick and textural, and now I can bring them over to my bag and I can decide which side I want where and which side I want to be facing out. And once I've done that, I can sew them in place. So I've placed the channel face down on the bag and I've pinned it in place. I've placed it so that it's in the middle and the edges are lining up to the edge of the bag. Now the lining hasn't been folded under to the other side yet, so it might be hard to see, but the channel edges are meeting the edge of that rectangle. To attach this, I'm going to stab stitch front to back all the way along. You could draw a line here too on the back to help guide where to stitch. I'm going to take a few extra stitches at the beginning and at the end, and this is where the channels will have the most stress, so I want a strong join. And then I'm going to stitch to the other side. So I'm almost at the end, and I'm going to add those extra stitches for reinforcement and tie off. Now I can fold the channel up and over to the other side, and then I need to determine how much to fold it over before stitching it down. Now the lining is going to cover this edge, so I don't need to worry about the raw fabric edge here. So I'm going to pin this edge and stitch it down. And then I'll do the same thing at the beginning, taking extra stitches, and then move my way along, attaching this edge. I'm at the other end now, and I want to show what it's looking like on the inside. You can see the first side that I attached, and the raw edge is sitting there inside that channel. So I'm going to top stitch over that part and enclose that raw edge. So I'm going through all the way from the back to the front, which is a lot of thicknesses. So I'm taking my time and I'm checking almost every stitch to make sure that I'm enclosing that raw edge that I want to hide. I've made my way to the end, and now I'm going to travel my thread to the back and bury my knot there. So let's take a look at the channel now. The raw edge is gone and the channel looks nice and clean on both ends. I'm going to take those green pieces that will become the lining and fold them in here and flip the piece over, and you can see that there's the channel. It seems like it's been part of it. So now I'm going to flip over to the other side, and I'm going to put a channel on the other end in the same way as I did with the first side. So here's my channel on the second side. I've created it the same way. So now I'm ready to take my green fabric and fold it to the inside. Now these were scraps of fabric, and so they're uneven. You can see when I fold that first piece over that there's quite a slant on the piece. It's not straight at all. And then I'm going to go to the other side and fold that in. And these are both from the same piece of fabric, so it also is uneven at the edge. So on one side, you can see that it's completely covering the inside there, covering all that stitching. And on the other side, it's not quite covering it. There's also a raw edge there. So if this was big enough, what I would do is fold under that edge, and I'd stitch everything right down the middle. And that would be my lining. Because these two pieces folded in don't quite cover that background, I'm going to have to come up with another solution. So the first thing that I've done is I've stitched down that fabric to keep it on the inside. So I've created running stitches right along that edge. I'm going to do that on the other side now. So I've taken clips to hold it in place exactly where I want it to be. And then I'm just going to stitch from one end to the other. When I flip it over here, you can see that when that is stitched, I've got nice clean edges there, and there's a small stripe of that green that's going to be running down both sides. So now I've stitched that other side. My piece is looking really good from the front. So now I just have to cover up that strip down the middle where there's raw edges and it's not completely covering all of my stitching. So I've decided to pull out a piece of lace. I had this scrap and it's just about the right length. So I really like using up these odd pieces that I have. And this is going to add a really nice special something on the inside. So I'm going to tuck the edges under, so that will be a clean edge on both sides. And I'm going to stitch this down. I'm going to use a matching thread. And when I flip the piece over and I put the lace up against all my stitching and my mushrooms, I can see that it goes really well. There's nothing clashing. Even though it's going to be on the inside of the bag, I like the fact that this will match with the outside of the bag. So now I'm ready to stitch it on. So I've chosen green thread that matches my lining, and I've also stitched all along those green edges. So they're firmly in place. The lace is in place. When I fold my bag in half, it's looking really good. So now all I have to do is stitch down those sides. There's a couple of options here. You could turn the bag, put right sides together, and you could stitch all along on the inside of the bag. So those stitches would not be visible at all on the outside. And there would be a small ridge on the inside that wouldn't really be seen at all. So that's a very good option for stitching your bag. The other option is to fold it exactly the way you want it to be and stitch it on the outside. You could use a matching thread, so I could choose green, or I could choose a contrasting thread and let my stitching show. And I think that's what I'm going to do here. So I've taken some clips and I'm clipping my bag right at the top to make sure that it's lined up the way I want it. So both those sides are meeting, and then my channel is going to be sticking up over top of where I stitch. So now that I have that in place, I can stitch those sides up. So I'm using 2 strands of that same red floss that I had used to stitch on the bag. I'm going to start right at the top and stitch down to the bottom. So I'm coming in on one side, letting my knot be hidden inside. And now I'm going to start my stitching. So I'm going to take some extra stitches right at the top because I want the bag to be strong, right where there's going to be stress there. So I'm going right through both sides, back and forth a few times. There are a number of different stitches that you could use to stitch this bag closed. A blanket stitch would be really nice. You could also use a whip stitch. I'm going to go back and forth, creating a kind of zigzag pattern by going in on the inside and bringing my thread through. I'm going to go on the inside on the one side, pull my thread through, and come back and go on the inside on the other side and pull my thread through. It's going to give this really nice cinched effect. So I'm going to the inside with my needle, inside that fold every time, going across to the other side, going inside and coming out. I really like the effect that this stitch gives. I don't know the name of this stitch. So if you know what this stitch is called, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to give it a name. So I've come to the end. There's all those diagonal stitches going back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thread at the end, make sure that I've got that very last bit of that fold. And I don't want to have a knot that's showing here. So I'm going to take my thread and travel it along. I have those red stitches that are already there. So I'm going to bring my thread over about 1/2 inch, maybe a little less than that. And I'm going to take a stitch really close to where I came out and make a small knot. And then I'm going to try and pull that inside as much as possible so that it doesn't show. So now I'm going to take my thread one more time and I'm going to travel it in the other direction, pull it out before I snip it off. So there is my seam They look like straight stitches if you look at them straight on. And from the side, they have a beautiful zigzag effect. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side as well. I really like the way that these seams look, and I'm glad that I stitched it on the outside. There's the inside of my bag. You can see that lace in there. It's looking really good. So now the only thing left to do is add the drawstrings to the channel. So I'm going to use t-shirt material for my strings. You could use rope, you could use ribbon. I happen to have a lot of these 1-inch strips of t-shirts. So this is what it looks like when you've cut a 1-inch strip from a t-shirt. So this is actually doubled. It's cut off of the bottom of the shirt. So I'm going to open it up. Now some t-shirts will have a seam here and some won't. It depends. So you either cut off that seam or you just snip it to make it one long big piece. So then you just stretch out this 1-inch piece of your t-shirt and it shrinks down and it rolls together and it becomes a really nice drawstring. So I'm going to stretch this out. It's a fairly long piece. So I'm going to do it in sections. Here it is all stretched out. It's nice and stretchy and soft. So what I need to do is cut 2 drawstrings. So the length I want it to go all the way around my bag, and then I want to have enough extra to pull those strings and tie them off. So this seems like a good amount to me. So I'm going to cut it here, and then I'm going to use that first piece as my guide to cut my second piece. So now I have my 2 pieces of drawstring. So now I just need to thread them inside the channels. So to do this, I take a safety pin and I connect it right to one end. I'm going to fold over the end there, put my safety pin through and close it. Then I'm going to start at one end. It doesn't matter which end you start at. And I'm going to take it all the way through the channel and out through the other side. I'm going to pull it out the other end and I'm going to leave myself some of the drawstring. I'm not going to pull it all the way through, and then I'm going to turn the bag and I'm going to keep going into the other side. I'm going to put my safety pin in and I'm going to pull it through to the other end of that second channel, and I'm going to pull that out. Then I can remove my pin. I'm going to make sure that these ends are fairly even, and then I'm going to tie a knot in the end. And you can tie that knot now or after you've put in the second drawstring. I like to tie it now because it keeps it in place when I'm putting in the second drawstring and I don't get confused about what end I'm dealing with. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and now I just start on the opposite side and I do the same thing. I go through the first channel, I flip it over, and then I go through the second channel. And so my 2 ends will be sticking out on the other side when I'm done. So now I have my second channel in place. I've tied a knot on that end, and you can snip the ends off, makes it a little cleaner. And now my bag is complete. I can pull it closed and take a look at it. That's looking really good. I'm really glad I chose red for the drawstrings. That's really pulling out the reds that are in that piece. It's a nice contrast to all the green and yellow colors. So here is the completed bag. This has so many extra details. I've really taken it to the next level with the stitching, with the lace on the inside, and a mushroom on the back and the front. What a fun bag. If you've made a drawstring bag with me before, I hope this inspires you to make another and take it to the next level. You can make these bags in any size. You can customize them so that they fit the items that you're thinking of. There's so many options. These make great gifts. If you have a particular person in mind and you know what their favorite colors are, if you know that they would like a mushroom or a bird or something else, this makes a great gift. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, happy stitching.